Okay. Welcome to you all. And this is the first in a series of four that we agreed to kind of do from the CIT, specifically for you folks in the DISC program. So, welcome to you all. And what I want to do is I kind of want to go through and talk to you a little bit about what andragogy is and what our students' needs are within this. And think about this a second. What does the adult learner need? Even before we kind of get into some of this theory and practice and what's going on, what does the adult learner need? Start thinking about that. Start thinking about this. Start thinking about yourself and you as a learner now versus when you were a learner as a kid. Think of the difference. What was the big difference? I'll even start with that. What was the big difference between you as a kid, maybe think of it in high school, and you as a learner now? What was the big difference?
Explicit expectations. What exactly do you want from me for what point value so I can get an A?
Okay. More you now or
Yeah.
that you then?
That was, then I just kind of went to class and assumed I'd do well.
Okay. What else is different between you now as an adult learner versus you as a kid, as a child?
More of an independent learner. I don't need to be pushed, and I'll study on my own. I'll do a lot of work on my own.
The term in the literature for that, and you'll hear me talk about that in a few minutes, is what we call self-directed learning, Paul.
Yeah.
It absolutely is spot on target. In fact, if you think about it, most of at this point aren't interested in grades. We aren't interested in any of those things. We are interested in learning things that are going to apply. But there's one other big difference between you as far as being self-directed and looking for certain other things. But there's a big difference between you now. Think about who you are now versus who you were when you were, say, 14 years old or 15. What's one of the biggest differences?
Relevant life experiences. So we want the education to be in sync with what our needs will be moving forward.
Bingo. Absolutely. This is one of the key elements that is a major difference between kids and adults in the learning process. You now have life experience. So you have what they call a rich resource to build upon. You have that rich foundation of things, and you want things that are going to apply and do what you're doing now. In other words, things that are going to be applicable. In other words, what you learn today, you want to be able to apply tomorrow in your life. We don't have a lot of extra room. We need to see the things that are building upon our experiences and upon our life. That's the difference between us now as learners and when we were kids. So that's what those two things, I think, kind of fit with that model. And when you think of yourself as a learner, that helps us to understand our adult students more. So the term andragogy is what we hear within the literature. You hear the term pedagogy and andragogy. Pedagogy is the art and science of teaching kids. Andragogy is the art and science of teaching adults. Pedagogical type teaching is more teacher-centric, whereas andragogy is considered to be more student-centric. Now, we'll kind of argue those points because I think they're just different key terms. But the term andragogic came from Alexander Kapp and came from 1833 in the Greek. 1926, we saw Edward Lindemann start to publish and made the statement, which I find interesting, that adults can learn. Think back to 1926. There wasn't a lot of adult learning going on other than the fact that, people went to high school and then you went to work. But Edward Lindemann, through research, produced and said adults can still learn. Okay, that was kind of interesting as well. In fact, there were a lot of people up to recent that thought, once you reach a certain age that, you just don't bother learning anymore. You're not interested in learning. But andragogy has showed up in the literature and again started showing up in literature in the 50s and the 60s. Malcolm Knowles and several others started publishing from this. In fact, he asserted the term andragogy within the literature and used it quite heavily. And it basically stems from the Greek term man leading. So the question, are adult learners different? Well, we kind of looked at that and said, yeah, they are a little different. They're different in the sense that they have life experience, which kids don't have. So you have that building block, that foundation to kind of build upon. Adult learners are also different in the sense that they don't want extraneous things. They want learning that is applicable to what they're doing now. They don't have a lot of room for extra things in their life. And adult learners are very self-directed. Things are not as prescriptive for adults. Okay. Although, let me say this, that sometimes adults aren't sure what they need to know or what they need to learn. So it's not completely self-directed. They're looking for some direction. So you need to find that balance within your teaching as to what the adult knows and what the adult needs. So adult learning is viewed as facilitation over intense classroom teaching. Think about this, you as an adult teacher serve more as a facilitator. You're a guide to the learning process. You know things that student doesn't know. So that's part of that self-directed nature in the sense that they don't always know what they need to know, but you do. So your role is to guide them or to facilitate them. They don't a lot of times want that top down. They want more interactive type teaching and learning. So the instructor here is not limited to just one-way lectures with marginal involvement from students. That's more the pedagogical approach, at least as the literature talks about. What we also find is online education and the internet has provided a whole variety of different opportunities. In fact, one of the things that I have always said is that the online arena, the use of an LMS or the use of a synchronous chat provides yet another paradigm or another set of pedagogical opportunities. In my mind, it's not an either or. It's not, well, we're going to do online or we're going to do on ground and neither the two shall meet. I'm of the belief that the online materials through LMS, through synchronous, provides yet another platform and another set of pedagogical or instructional activities and another opportunity to teach and learn. So it just kind of doubles that out if you want to. In fact, I'm of the belief, and several of you have kind of said the same thing in some of our conversations, that the online provides an opportunity that some things are better taught online and some things are better taught on ground. And sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out which is better. Example, think of discussions that you've had. If you have a face-to-face discussion, who participates in that? If you throw out a discussion prompt, who participates? Think of that for a second. Who participates when you throw out a question? What does the class do? Does everybody participate?
No, they sit there with blank looks on their face.
Yeah, generally. And who does speak, Paul? Who generally speaks?
Only a few of who are very interested.
Few who are very interested, or a few who think very quickly and can kind of put something off, speak very quickly in the class. But everybody's not active in that. Everybody is not engaged in that learning process. They become very passive. And what generally happens is when somebody speaks, then the rest of the class goes, thank goodness it wasn't me. And you generally, even in that discussion, get a very superficial conversation. So I might argue that certain things are better done through the online, such as maybe a discussion. Maybe it's better, I'm not saying everything, but maybe certain discussions are done better online because now everybody has to participate. You can't be anonymous as you are in a class. In other words, you can't just put your head down and pretend that you're writing so nobody will call on you. In the online, if you do a discussion board, everybody participates and they take the time to write a very cogent thought. So maybe that's one of those situations that the online pedagogy provides yet a better platform for adults to take the time to really utilize the prompt, to think about what they're going to write and put together a very cogent thought. It also provides a greater opportunity for you as the instructor to not only just interact with one or two people through that discussion, but to interact with everybody. Now, having said that, it also takes a tremendous amount of time. In other words, you do an in-class discussion, maybe that's 5 minutes of your time and their time. But if you do an online discussion, well, now you're taking several hours because it becomes more one-on-one type training. So there's pros and cons to all those things, and you kind of have to know and understand that. So what we see in the adult learning model is a shift to the learner involvement rather than just the isolationism. And this can help. We can shift this to the learner through a couple of different modalities, which I understand you're all doing or at least planning to do within the upcoming program that you're working with. You're working with face-to-face time. You're going to be working with synchronous, and you're going to be working with asynchronous. What's the difference between synchronous and face-to-face? What's the difference between synchronous and face-to-face?
We're in a virtual environment, but the student has the ability to see and hear us in real time. But I'm struggling because I don't feel that all of my content is relevant to synchronous. And I'm going to struggle with it when I'm actually building the class.
I think there's time, and this is the balance, and I think that you have, and this is some of the things that we'll talk about in some of the coming presentations. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about objective writing and just curriculum in general. And then next Monday at this time, we'll talk about instructional design, instructional delivery, how you kind of balance the synchronous, the asynchronous, what you can do online, what you can do, more in real time. We'll kind of talk through some of those things. And in all honesty, and you're absolutely right, Ann, there's certain things that are just much easier to design. And I'm going to argue that you shouldn't probably try and force anything into anything, that you need to let the objectives kind of steer you. Now, having said that, there are certain times that we absolutely have to put things online like we're doing right now. And you say, well, I'd much rather teach this in this modality, but, I'm kind of forced here. So we'll kind of talk about some options and some things that you can do that may make things a little more palatable for you in student learning. But the difference in Ann's definition is spot on target. The difference between synchronous and face-to-face, both of them are in real time. The difference is face-to-face, we are sitting in the same classroom. Synchronous is where we're sitting in the same time, but we're separated by distance. Asynchronous, by definition, is we are separated from our learners in time and space. So something that we post at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, somebody else is not viewing and interacting with until Saturday afternoon, Monday morning, whenever. And there are some advantages and disadvantages to both. And I think the blend of all this, in fact, what you are all doing with the face-to-face, the synchronous, and the asynchronous is what is termed as blended learning. It's termed as a hybrid approach. And if you want to, there's a whole bunch of information on blended learning on the Blackboard site. If you go in under teaching online, there's a whole bunch of information there. There's some presentations on blended learning and some articles. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I have found it to be one of the most rewarding ways to teach. You get the best of both worlds. You get the best of the self-directed nature of an online and the clarity of face-to-face when you kind of blend those kind of things, and students like it. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to teach I think it was a nurse education program. I was teaching up at the Regional Learning Alliance where the nurses were, and we would do every other week. One week I was face-to-face with them. The opposite week I was online with them. And I found it to be some of the most valuable teaching because it really did allow the students to have that very nice blend of learning where they had the clarity of me in front of them to answer their questions in real time, but then they had every other week the self-directed nature of take it and do it when they want. The students reported that they loved it. It was one of the best learning experiences that they had. And it's all in how you structure it and all in how you do this. So these can be very, very well done. I would think about scattering your synchronous throughout the course as opposed to, lumping them all in the same hour and forcing them. Allow the methodology or allow your pedagogy, allow the curriculum to kind of guide what you do. And I think that will kind of help along the way. All right, let's talk a little bit about what we call the 4 cornerstones of effective education. This came by a gentleman by the name of Raymond Lodowski. He started publishing this in 1985, and he keeps republishing the book. I think he's in his 12th edition. Last one that I saw was 2008, although I think he put out another one after that. He said there are 4 cornerstones of the effective educator. He says there is expertise, enthusiasm, empathy, and clarity. Think about this a minute. You ever have somebody standing in front of you talking who didn't know their subject matter, and you actually catch them saying something wrong? What does that do for you as the learner? If you catch somebody saying something wrong, what does that do for you as the learner?
it destroys that person's credibility.
Bingo. Spot on, Donna. It absolutely does. If you can't trust what's coming out of that person's mouth, if they're not credible, then you can't learn from them. And you don't trust anything else that's being said. So that becomes a big thing. You have to have it. It's assumed that you are a subject matter expert, that you have the knowledge. You also have to be very, very enthusiastic about what you're teaching. Think about this. If you ever had somebody standing in front of you that just seemed to be bored to death with what they were talking about, yeah, adult learning is really important. I like adult learning. I think you'll like adult learning. If that person is bored to death with what they're talking about, if they're not enthusiastic, in other words, they have this body of knowledge. If this doesn't excite them, then why do I need to learn it? So enthusiasm on your part, whether it's in the online, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, that level of enthusiasm needs to come through. And as it does, it becomes motivational for the students. So if you can illustrate and show an excitement for your subject matter and the learning that goes, it will be contagious to your students. The last two, the empathy and the clarity, I think in my mind kind of go together, although these all four go together. What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Anybody? What's the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Empathy, you relate at a level that is comparable to the experience the other person is having.
Yeah, I think sympathy is you're feeling sorry for someone, but you don't have the same feeling, and it didn't happen to you. But with empathy, you're empathizing with them, you're feeling sorry for them, but you have that same feeling.
Absolutely. You're both absolutely spot on with that. Empathy is the ability for you as the instructor to put yourself in that student's position because you have a firsthand understanding, because we're all learners. You were all where they are. In fact, they look at you as the end point. The body of knowledge and skill that you have is where they wish to go. They wish to be you, if you want to think about that. You know, the whole idea of sympathy is, as Paul said, yeah, I see you're going through something. I'm not sure I completely understand it, but I feel bad you're going through it. Empathy is completely different and an important tool. It helps us to understand. The other term, if you search that out within the literature, that you'll see, the other word is caring. Students need to see that we care. The last thing on that list is clarity. And this becomes paramount in what we are teaching. You know, you have to provide a level of clarity, whether it's in the face-to-face setting, whether it's in the online setting, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, you have to be clear. And there's lots of different ways to do that. In fact, it's really interesting. Sometimes we think we're being clear, but we actually are not. Okay, we actually are not. It's something different. All right, Malcolm Knowles started publishing back in the late 50s and 60s and was very prominent in publishing through the 70s and 80s. He passed away in 1998, and they're still publishing a couple of his books, and there have been some new editions. He started publishing a book, The Adult Learner, in the latter side of the 90s before he passed, and is continued being published now. But he believed that adult learners were centered on self-actualization. And I think all of us as learners are. I mean, think about where you are and what you choose to learn and what we were talking about before. He felt that there was a supernatural or a natural progression from a dependent learner to becoming that self-directed learner. And that was part of the maturing of us as adults. One of the things that he found, and Stephen Brookfield also supported back in 1992, that adult learning and pedagogical learning are unique to each other. In other words, that there is a different theory of adult learning, as well as a unique adult form of practice. And I don't know that that's correct. One of the things that Knowles said toward the end of his, and I saw an interview with him toward the latter side of his career in the mid-90s, he made a statement that, you know, he was real big on the adult learning theory and thought that it was only for adults. But he's realized that it's probably not just for adults, it's also for kids, and it stands as just another learning theory like any of the others that are out there. And it's not just unique to adults. Think about this. How many of you think back to your high school days. You know, we all took the courses we were required to take. We all took the civics, and we took the We took the maths and the Englishes and the social sciences and everything else that we were required to take in the phys ed. And we don't take those courses now. And you would say, well, at that point in time, I was very pedagogical because I really didn't have a lot of self-direction. But I want you to think about this. When you were in high school and maybe even in younger, did you do other things? How many people were involved in sports? Okay. There's learning that's going on there, and that was you were self-directed or self-actualized to do those kind of things. How many of you were involved in scouting, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts? How many of you chose to get involved in band or any extracurricular activities? How many people were involved in dance or, any one of a number of other things that we as kids did? And I would argue that that is adult learning. We were self-directed. We were choosing to learn the things that we wanted to learn. Hobbies, chess, pick it. Think of anything that we did. Those were all self-directed in how we approach things. So there is that unique process or that argument that maybe is just not one way. Malcolm Knowles found that adults have several things going on, and these were some of the principles that he published over the years. The self-concept of an adult moves from being a dependent personality to being a self-directed human being. I would argue that every one of us have made that transition. Adults have accumulated a growing reservoir of experience that becomes an increasingly rich resource for learning. In other words, we have life experience, is what we were talking about before. We now, as a learner, are not the same as we were as kids. And the only true difference, I think, between us and kids is that we do have life experience. And that does provide that opportunity for us to build on things. Adults' readiness to learn becomes oriented to the developmental tasks of their social roles. Simply stated, where we are now is what we want to learn. I mentioned civics before. How many people in here have taken a civics class lately? Anybody taken a civics class? How many of you remember what civics was? I'm not sure I do. Why don't we take those? But we did. Most of us took it somewhere in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade. We had to take a civics class. I remember taking it. But why don't we take those now? Because they don't relate to what we're doing. Why are you taking this particular program right now? Because it does relate to something. Most of you have sat in on some program the CIT training that the training has done. You've self-directed and chosen to do that because you say, okay, I want to learn more about that, or I want to see more. How many of you have gone out and read articles? How many of you have taken a look at the CIT stuff that we have posted on the Blackboard shelf? That's because you're self-directed. You've chosen to do those things to learn more. Adults require immediacy of application, and learning shifts from subject-centeredness to performance-centeredness. We want to apply what we are learning. That's basically what Knowles is telling us, and that's absolutely correct. Now, from the literature, from Knowles, from Mitchell, from Pike, from several others, have kind of extrapolated the 7 adult learning principles. Adults need to know why they should learn something and why they have to. In other words, and think about this, where has your pushback come from your students? What I find is when the students just generally don't understand why they have to learn something or where this is going to apply, then that's where they lose interest. Have you all found the same kind of thing when you've had pushback from students? Has it been because they just generally, if you really kind of look at that and kind of look at why are they pushing it? Because they don't understand. And maybe that goes back to what Lodowski was talking about. We didn't provide enough clarity as to what they were learning or why they were learning it. That in turn can kind of help the students, but it also helps us. Okay, it takes some of that pressure off of us, if you will, as to what we need to do and how we need to do it. Where am I at here? Okay. An adult learning experience is a valuable resource for additional learning. Okay, we know that from what Knowles told us before, but Mitchell also tells us this. The adult's learning experience, if it is as valuable, so what does that tell us we need to do in our teaching? How do we deal with that? If we know they have life experience, pull that life experience in. Utilize that life experience. We utilize in our PhD program a cohort model as well. the same as you do. And what I find with any kind of a cohort model is the students come with a variety of different life experience. And in that cohort model, they're marching through the program over the next 3 years with that same group of, 15 people. The difference is every 8 weeks, a new instructor rotates in front of them. And I've always felt and said this, and the students kind of agreed, that they learn as much from each other as they do from the content, as they do from the instructor. So utilize that, build those kind of things into what we are utilizing within our classroom. Pull experiences, pull the life experiences and how they relate. Adult learners tend to focus on life-centered, task-centered, or problem-centered learning activities. Again, this goes back to where they're going to apply things, where they're going to utilize things, and where they plan on utilizing this. Had 2 people that joined our program 3 years ago. They are both now in their early 70s. So they started the program when they were in their very late 60s. And, they were both retired. And I said, at admission, I said, why do you want to do this? And they said, look, we've done a lot of things. I've got a lot of experience. I've been retired twice, and there are still things that I want to do. And I want to learn this because I have things I still want to do. So they were very, very life-centered, and they wanted to apply what they were learning, but this was also a life goal in some respects. So we kind of have to understand that it becomes life-centered, it's task-centered, or it's problem-centered. In other words, they've got something that they need to learn. Some folks will take certain trainings because they're looking for a fix to something that is an issue. Adult learners learn best when they practice, perform, and work with new knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So they want to learn things. You don't want to just learn things that you've already know. I would probably argue that there's some of the folks that chose not to join this attended a session like this before. Example, I know AJ sat in and he and I have spent a significant amount of time talking about the adult learner. So it's probably not something he needs to re-see. Adult learners learn easiest when they have some familiarity with where this is going to apply. And that goes back to that application thing Noel was talking about. Adult learners favor different senses for learning. If you're into the whole learning styles thing, what this tells us is, and this goes back to some of the training that we teach our teachers, that we differentiate instruction. In other words, we provide a variety of different instructional strategies and the different ways that people learn and do. And it's the idea that when they can see that application of the learning and they can utilize it through the different senses for learning, then they're more likely to learn. So it tells us as instructors that there's not just one way to teach and learn. We have to rotate through. And just because something works today doesn't mean that it'll work tomorrow. We have to keep it mixed up. We have to keep a variety of different things in front of our students because people get bored. Adult learners like to be self-directing, and they like to see their own progress. In other words, they're more interested in progress. Think about it. You guys aren't interested in grades. You could care less about a grade. You're more interested in application of this, and you're more interested to see, where you're going to apply it and how it's going to be done. So let's take a little bit of an overview of some of the adult learning theory and what the research has said. The research has considerably demonstrated the dichotomy between adult and child adolescent learning styles, that adults are different. I think, as you see the mass amount of research that's been published over the years, and there's even more so these days, there is that dichotomy that exists between the adult and the child. But I think that the greatest difference comes from that life experience. Kids don't have the life experience to build upon that adults do. So we need to utilize that. We need to understand those differences. That doesn't mean that children and adolescents are not self-directed. They just don't have the foundational information or the foundational knowledge and skills to do so. Adults do not learn in the same manner as kids. They learn differently. We know this. And so you can't teach adults utilizing techniques that were developed for kids. They just don't work quite as well. So teaching adults utilizes what we call the process model, whereas teaching children and adolescents requires a content model. So we need to have the process of understanding what the adult needs. Now, as instructors, there are times that we will get very pedagogical and we will be very structured in our teaching. That doesn't mean adult learning does not have structure. It just means we need, as instructors, need to read and understand what our students need. Okay. And it just takes on a different parameter there. If I had time, I would have. Go ahead.
Rich, you know, you're talking about adults and children. When do you high school senior, is that classified as an adult or a senior, or is someone in one of my classes? Are they adults? You know, when you talk about children or adolescents, I understand, but where does that line break when you talk about adult learners? So we're teaching adult learners at the university level. We're not teaching adolescents.
It's a good question, Paul. And I would probably argue that I've known some 18-year-olds that I would consider to be adult learners, and I've known some 47-year-olds that I would consider to be child learners. I don't think that there's an age line. I think it's more of a maturation line. I think where people have matured and where they are in their life is different. What I find interesting, and you probably have the exact same thing. Think about the people that come into your doctoral program. You know, you get people, I'm sure you get some in their 20s, you get some in their 30s, you get some in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and like I said, we had two in our 70s. I think people are ready for certain things at different points in their life. That's the thing. I don't think that there is anything that is prescriptive that says this is who an adult. When you're 23 years old, you're an adult. I wish it worked that way. It would make it cleaner and easier for us. But I would also argue that the people that come into your program, they have done so because they've made a major commitment to learning, to gaining their degree. We find the exact same thing, you know, and people that we think, as we interview them, we go through and accept them. There's some people that really do present as adults, but we found out later that maybe they weren't as mature as we thought they were as a learner. They weren't as mature as they thought they were. So I'm not sure, Paul, that there is a
yeah. Maybe it's past learning experience too, because I know that, you know, if I'm doing something with a graduate level class, master's degree level, and undergrad, there's a big difference. And if I'm doing something online with them, so I think maybe it's a process, is that as like a maturing process through the learning that the more they're in school, the more their higher level of degrees that maybe they're more self-directed, like you said at the beginning, rather than you have to spoon feed them like an adolescent.
Well, here's something else that I find interesting. When you start to do this, and probably more at the undergrad and the grad level, although I wish, and I think when you talk to high school teachers, they want this. They want their students to be self-directed, but they don't give them that opportunity to do so. And sometimes you need to train people how to become self-directed. In other words, what that means. I think it's innately within most of us, but sometimes we don't understand how to learn through an adult model because everything has been spoon-fed to us. But I think there's a balance, and I think there's a personal maturity that goes with that, Paul. It's individuals, and it's just how they approach things. So I think part of our job is to help those people through that. In other words, the ones that we identify that you think should be adults, sometimes you need to have that conversation with them about what that means and how they build upon it and how they learn. And occasionally I've had to have that. I had to have a conversation with a second-year doctoral student who was acting very immature in class and wasn't learning because he wasn't doing certain things. And he and I had to have a little bit of a conversation. You don't expect that of somebody who's, in their late 30s to do something like that. But occasionally you do. And that's part of that process of helping them learn. And you give them what they need at that point. It's not always easy, and it doesn't always make sense because we assume certain things. And as you said, Paul, hey, when are they an adult? At 18, when they graduate high school? I'd hope. I don't know that. I'm not sure I was, but I think we all look at that different. What I would have done if we were doing this in a face-to-face type of a settings, I might have had you take a look at that article that I posted up there on the Blackboard site, and we could have jigsawed that. We'll talk a little bit more about that next Monday when we start talking about some instructional strategies. But that's a group work thing. That's a cooperative learning thing, and it's a different way to interact with adults because now they become not just self-directed, but they can become very active in the learning process. This is the other thing adults want. They don't want to be passive learners. They want to be active learners. And that becomes a key element that we need to see as well. So let's talk about the content model of pedagogy, which is the dichotomy side of the other aspect of adult learning. The content model relies on the teacher to determine what knowledge or skills need to be learned. It's governed by the assumption that the learner is dependent totally on the faculty member for everything that's being taught. It's based on physical, mental, and social development, and is typically applied later in the learning experience. It works under the idea that it is very teacher-centric. The content model says that we need to teach what the teacher believes is important. Now, think about the subjects that you are all teaching. Are there certain subjects that are very, very specific? And if you made them self-directed, the student is likely to miss certain things. I would probably argue there is. If you're teaching things like COBOL, or you're teaching things like statistics, or you're teaching things like research methodology, or you're teaching very skill-oriented type content areas, there are things that have to be learned. A has to be learned before B, before C, before D. If they learn it out of order, then they're not going to be able to apply it, and they will not have learned what they needed to learn. That's where you as the instructor need to understand that balance of how much learner control do I give and how much do I pull back. That's, again, that balance. You can't have people learn statistics in a self-directed manner. You can't say, well, I really don't feel like learning t-tests today. That's just not something I think I'll apply. But then, if the student doesn't learn that, then how are they going to possibly learn and understand ANOVAs? It's those kind of things that you look at. They have to learn A before B. That's where our expertise is faculty come into play with this. All right, the process model, which is considered to be more andragogical, relies on more of a collaborative environment where the adult learner acquires the necessary resources to obtain information and skills that kind of help them along their way. Adult learners enter their learning experience as independent and self-directed in nature. Okay, Knowles and Cranton said that back in the 80s and then reestablished in the 90s. And the adult learning experience categorized as collaborative, mutual, and is considered to be a reflective experience. The balance between the content model and the process model is how you read your students. This goes back to the empathy and the clarity of what students need. So it's not just an either or. In fact, it's never an either or. It is, from a theoretical point of view, you're applying the different theories as you see them needed and as you read your students. We generally understand adults to be more process and less content, but there are times that they need to be more content driven. And that's the balance that we find and that we look at. The knowledge of principles of practice. Teachers of adults should aim to gain the awareness of some of the principles that guide their teaching practice. So Socrates would be very pleased with that type of a statement. We need to become self-aware of our own practices and how we teach and what kind of things that we do. Now, Knowles, in helping us to understand that, identified 7 components of helping adults to learn. Let's go through a couple of those here. 1, establishment of a physical and psychological climate that is conducive to learning. In other words, what we need to do is we need to provide a safe space. And that's not just a physically safe space, that's a psychologically safe space. What does that mean when you say psychologically safe? What kind of things does that bring to mind?
You can answer incorrectly and not be shamed or humiliated.
Right. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to discuss something. It's okay to have a different opinion. It's okay to throw out different ideas and open up for discussion. And that's where you have to create that, quote, psychologically safe space. That is of vital importance to an adult learner. We assume the physical safety, that our classrooms are physically safe, and that sometimes is out of our control, but we assume those things. Psychological safety is what is definitely within our wheelhouse. You also want to involve learners in the planning and the teaching methods. In other words, give them some voice in this. This is what is also known as choice theory. Choice theory says that we provide choice. In other words, when it doesn't matter to us because of the content, Give the students choice. Would you rather do this first or do this first? Provide a little bit of choice for them, and it just makes things a little bit easier. The involvement of learners in diagnosing educational needs is also of vital importance. In other words, give them the voice in what do they need to learn? What do they need to hear more of? Do you know this? Do you not know this? And sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. That again is you as the teacher, as the instructor or the professor, kind of reading that. You need to also provide encouragement of learners to help formulate not only what is learned, but maybe even some learning objectives. And again, that's a difficult thing because they don't always know what it is that they need to learn. But when you can give them choice, when you can give them input, it's an important thing. You need to have an encouragement of the learners to identify the resources and devise different strategies that can be utilized as well. Give them voice in this. Assist adult learners in executing their learning objectives. In other words, help them to figure out what they want to do. Now, how can we do all that? Because let's face it, you're teaching, you've got your structures in place, you've got your lectures in place, you've got the materials in place. How can we give them more involvement? How can we give them more choice of what to learn without just breaking down and not meeting the objectives that we have? What kind of things can we do? One of the biggest things I would tell you that you can do is give them choice in certain assignments. If you're having them write papers, which most of us do in most of our courses, allow them some choice on subject matter or application of those things. Allow them to apply the concepts that you're teaching them and that they're learning into their own learning environment or into their own work environment or where they're going to apply it. If you're talking about teaching a leadership class or talking about teaching any one of a number of other research classes, allow them to pick and choose the type of application and where they're going to apply those concepts and skills. And that then helps them with their learning objectives and helps them with the authentic learning that we're hoping to give them. Okay. There are some ways that we remember and some things to think about here. We remember through what we call episodic memory, which are basically personal events that happen to us. We have semantic memory, which are symbolic representations of knowledge. The whole idea between this is to stimulate the learner's involvement and to develop and increase the levels of interaction that we're giving. So what we want to do is, if episodic memory is more powerful, which it has a tendency to be, the episodic memories are the things that happen to us. They're the personal events. They're the personal experiences that we all build upon. The semantic memory, or the symbolic representations of knowledge, are the things that we give them through class a lot of times. In other words, these just become symbolic definitions of terms, things of that nature, steps and procedures and skills that we do. They're not internalized yet. They move into what we call the semantic memory. So what we want to do is move this into episodic memory. And we can do this by giving them personal experiences. Have them take those things that we are teaching them and have them put them into authentic learning experiences. One of the things that we have found is that the deepest dive on any learning project that we're giving in our PhD is the dissertation. You guys have done the exact same thing. This is where the students are learning the most because it internalizes. They are applying it in their own venue, they're applying it in their own area, and it becomes a highly personal event for them. So basically what we want to do is move things more into those personal events. We want to make them more active rather than passive. We want to generate interaction for them, not only with us, but with other students, but also with the content. You have what we call the cone of learning. Some of you have seen this before. I'm going to throw this all up. I don't know why I did it this way, but I will. Cone of learning, I question sometimes whether it's really highly based upon research, but it does show a couple things. And if this is even remotely true, we remember 10% of what we read. That's just through reading text materials and articles and things of that nature. We remember 20% of what we hear. That's just listening to lectures and listening to videos and recordings and things and what's going on around us. We remember 30% of what we see, visual aids, PowerPoints, things of that nature, just events. 50% of what we hear and see, that's watching demos and videos. 70% of what we say, and that's now participating in discussions and oral presentations. And 90% of what we say and do, simulations, real life experience. So what does this tell us? As teachers, what does this tell us? Teachers of adults and teachers of anybody for that matter. What does this tell us? What do you surmise from this?
Applied learning is unique and important in the learning process.
True. What else could you surmise from this?
If you want them to learn, 90% of the stuff, have them actually do something.
Bingo.
I had my class a couple of times in programming actually come up and teach a section of the class.
Well, that
And
becomes
when they went up and taught it, they really had to prepare for it so they understood it, which I guess would be doing, right? Or doing, right?
Here's something to think about. Put this all in perspective for everybody. In any classroom, who is learning the most? Based upon this, who in the class is learning the most?
The instructor.
Bingo. The instructor is learning the most. Why? Because they are the most active person in the room. They are fulfilling all of these things, and they're working back and forth and looking at a whole lot of stuff that's going on here. So the key element is the more active you can make people, the more involved. And as Paul said, look, I get them to teach it. So they're now learning it. The things that I have taught, the experiences that I've had where I was super engaged, where I was more active rather than passive, is where I did better and where learning occurred. So those are things to think about as you design things. And this can be done not only in the face-to-face, it can be done in a synchronous and also the asynchronous learning environments. Things to think about. All right, so we've talked about teaching adults and self-directed learning. Let's talk a little bit about Jack Mesereau's work with what he called transformational learning. The transformational learning theory works with the idea that learning is a social process, that it's a way to help students to develop and to transform themselves from who they were to who they want to be. It's a way of helping them to move through. And he said that there's 4 dynamics that go along with this. They're grappling with disorienting dilemmas. In other words, they're presented with information that they don't understand or not sure where they apply or contrary to things that they already know. So our role as the instructor, that we need to help them through these disorienting dilemmas. We need to help them through understanding where, and this goes back to the empathy that Lodowski was talking about. You need to help them to examine their assumptions, their preconceived notions. It's what Peter Senge calls our mental models. The preconceived ideas that we come into any learning experience, we need to help our students park them so that they can be open to new and different ideas and ways of doing things. We need to help them to seek out additional perspectives on things. And this, again, is where we get them into the research literature. That's helping them to change their ideas, where we give them different perspectives. So it's a variety of different learning tools, things that we give them and things that we direct them to learn, with the whole idea of acquiring new knowledge, and I would say skills as well, that can be applied in their particular area. This is our whole goal, is to assist them and to help them through this process. The transformational learning is really a very, very interesting process. Came out in '94 in several different books that Jack Mesereau has written. A lot of people quote him through the years, and his stuff is still being republished these days. It's something, if you're interested, I've got a couple of books in the office on that. If you're interested, I'll be glad to share one or two if we ever get back. But you can also do some searching out there in Jack Mesereau's work. So what is it that you are teaching? And I want this to think in your own teaching, the courses that you teach. What is it that you are teaching that is pedagogical? And how can you make it more andragogical? Are there things that you are teaching that are more teacher-centered? Can you make them more student-centered? And there may be. And as you were in the process of kind of retooling and restructuring some things, this is a perfect time to kind of look at those things and think about that. And I would tell you, utilize this question base as a way to kind of think through that. Okay. The questions also, what kind of methods do we use? Now, this is one that I came across. This is Pike's rule, and he suggests what he calls the 90-28 rule. It basically says that a class should never run more than 90 minutes, although we violate that with 4-hour classes. I usually give breaks just to kind of break those things up. The pace should change at least every 20 minutes. In other words, you need to mix things up. So if you're doing one particular structure or pedagogy, you kind of need to change that up a little bit every 20 minutes or so. And every 8 minutes, you need to find a way to get people involved. Okay, they need to be involved in some way so they become a little bit more active than passive in what they're doing. Okay. To generate interaction, there are several things that we consider, just some different pedagogies, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those: direct teaching, cooperative learning, different presentations, papers and projects, andragogy versus pedagogy, making those papers more andragogical, giving them choice versus your choice. It's what we call Glasser's choice theory that you'll hear. If that's another thing that you can look up if you're interested. And the question again is, where can you provide choice in your lessons? Where can you give the students more interaction? So think about those things right now. Just given our time, I'm not going to have you do that, but something for you to think about as you develop new lessons. Where can you provide choice in the lesson? Where can you allow the adults to interact through direct teaching? First of all, what is direct teaching? Anybody know? You've heard the term direct teaching before. What is direct teaching?
Lecture?
In part, it's lecture. You're right. It's absolutely lecture. That is a part of it. But direct teaching is also, think about the skills that you're teaching students. If you're teaching them how to do certain things, there's a certain set of steps and procedures that you go through where you provide a lecture, but you also may provide a demonstration. Direct teaching is demonstrating something where the students see how the skill is done. And then you go in and break that skill down of what you've just shown them into, several steps. And then you have them practice and do it. That's a direct teaching thing. And it's a very powerful way to learn. Sometimes it gets a bad name because a lot of times people just associate that with lecture, but there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it. Cooperative learning, what's cooperative learning all about? And why is that important?
They are sharing what they have discovered on their own with others.
Bingo. I think our cohort models absolutely do that, Donna. I think that they are innately unique to the fact that they're learning from each other. And I would argue that the whole cohort model is nothing more than just a big cooperative learning experience. It's a big group work thing because, as I said before, they're together for the next 3 years. The only thing that's different is every 8 weeks or 15 weeks, a new instructor rotates in front of them. So it really does become something that we as instructors can facilitate more. The group work is a great valuable thing. Most students really are resistant to group work because they're resistant because of the group grade. Yeah, people are, even adults, are still locked into the grade thing to a point. But the cooperative learning allows them to interact. In other words, you can interact with, you and I interact with them, but it also generates more student interaction, and it generates more student to content. In other words, it really delves in and allows them to become more active. Go back to that cone of learning. When they are working in group work like that, they are more active learners in that process, and that's something that we want to kind of generate more of. Anything that makes them more active than passive is a good thing. Now, this can also be done. We generally think that group work or cooperative learning can only be done in a face-to-face setting. That's actually not true. I think there's a lot of things that we can do both in this kind of a thing, and if you're utilizing Blackboard Collaborate, you can do breakout rooms. Very easy thing to do. The other thing that you can do is to also you can set up cooperative learning experiences asynchronously. In other words, where you give them a group page and do things like that. It's just another way to kind of look at that. So So different ways to kind of structure and look at any of those things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. Papers and projects, I think papers and projects are good for lots of different reasons, but if you have the opportunity to give them choice on application, I would tell you do so. It becomes a more powerful experience. Now, there are times that just doesn't work, but there are other times that you can. So you need to find that balance of when it's appropriate. And here's the thing I would tell you: do not force anything. Just as well, I've got to force into an adult model. Well, maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe they need more structure in what you're teaching them, and they don't need the choice at this point. Later on, you can give them choice. The key thing for you to understand is where can you provide choice in the lessons, and when do you not? It's just that balance. And I wish there was a formula way to teach. There just isn't. It has to be based upon what your needs are. So what I'm going to tell you to do is this. If we were doing this in a finale type of an exercise, I would have you think of a class that you regularly teach, or one that you are in the process of rewriting, because I understand you're all rewriting your coursework and you're kind of restructuring some things. Take a look at traditionally, how do you teach it? I would tell you to list out the pedagogical things that you do. In other words, the things that are more content driven, and list out the things that are andragogical. In other words, kind of take a look at where you are at with what you're doing, and then how can you promote more self-directed learning opportunities? What kind of things can you do to make them more active than passive? How can they be more self-directed? How can you evaluate what's going on? And how could you change your assessment to tell both you and the adult learner more? Sometimes assessments are not always of value. I mean, I don't know about you. How many of you give tests? How many of you give a lot of tests? Donnie, you're shaking your head no. You don't. You're muted.
Sorry. In
That's
grad, very little in terms of tests, but at the undergrad level, I still do it.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to look at the different students at when is it appropriate to give a test, when it's not. How do you assess them? How can you make the assessments authentic as well? I find that, and I'm with Dawn on this, at the end, when I teach undergraduate classes, yeah, I'm probably going to be testing a little bit more. But at the graduate and the doctoral level, I don't. And I think in our program, I guess a course like statistics lends itself to a little bit of testing, a little bit of, quiz type things. But I'm of the belief that they're more project. It's a greater thing. Project-based type learning is more appropriate, I think, because there's application, and I can assess more of what you've learned as far as how you're going to apply it. What I generally find is any kind of tests that you give, students, even at the adult level, will memorize what they need to, come in, spit out the information, and promptly forget it. So I kind of question, what's the overall value of testing? At least at the adult level, I'd probably say is not all that much, except maybe there are times, if you are doing certain things that require that they have foundational knowledge to build on, to apply, well, maybe that's an appropriate thing. And you have to, as the instructor, know where those lines are and where that falls down. And lastly, questions, kids. Questions on anything that we've talked about with the adult learner, with applying those things in the online and what's going on there. Anybody? Okay, well, I'm actually going to stop the recording.